their talk and like their overall position, and then we'll open up with some questions. And my sense is we will have a lot to discuss. I don't know what the order was for the Devcon talks. Okay, 9 a.m. Do we have anyone before 10 a.m.? Yeah. We can do the same order. Okay, so we'll start with this 5-minute recaps. Yeah, please come. I guess everyone who had a talk, please come and sit here. And I guess also for a bit of context before we dive in. So the goal with these sessions is to have like an open conversation with everyone here. So if you have like a question or a comment or something you want to bring in, we have a bunch of chairs here. You can just come and sit and join the conversation. It shouldn't be just like us talking to you for an hour and a half, but ideally two-way conversation. Yeah, does that make sense? Any question before we get started? Okay, so let's have Ansgar start, give some context, and then we'll go at the same order of the schedule and open up after there. You have 5 minutes. You have to turn the mic on.
Sounds even better. Can you hear me? Awesome. Yeah. So we gave a talk in the morning. So thanks for everyone who attended here, because morning sessions are always a little bit tough to get an audience for. And the idea there was just to talk primarily about so specifically there was Casper and me. Casper and we published this post in February on why the Ethereum should change its issuance, and that had quite a bit of kind of blowback on Twitter. And one of the kind of the pieces of feedback that we got there was just that people really wanted to first understand why we even want to change anything before we start talking about what to change. So we focused on just talking about why we think the current situation is unsustainable. It's maybe too short to go through all the argument. I think specifically what I wanted to mention is we have this what we call nominal versus real yield. I had a nice example with little stickman that transfer money, but basically the idea is just staking has two weird accounting anomalies. The first one was already present in proof of work, which is just that we pay via dilution instead of direct taking coins out of one balance and putting it into another balance, right? So that already makes accounting a little bit more indirect, because you have to basically take into account that indirectly everyone who holds the coin was a little bit taxed to then forward it to the recipients, which is the first kind of accounting anomaly. And then the second accounting anomaly that is specific only to proof of stake is that the recipients are a subset of the same people that pay for it in the first place, right? Because both of them are, one of them is the entire set of ETH holders and the other one is a subset of the ETH holders. And that leads to this really strange effect that you pay and then you receive more money back, basically, for if you're a staker. And so, for example, if you take the midpoint, right, if half of all people stake, then for every 2 coins that you get issued as staking rewards, one of them is just offsetting the taxation that you just went through, basically, to pay for the security. So only 1 in 2 coins is real income. The other one is just pure accounting kind of circular payment. And so that means that has all kinds of implications. A trivial one is just a lot of you pay taxes on staking income, which means you actually pay taxes on normally you pay taxes on both of those coins that you just got, even though one of them is fake. So say if you get taxed at 50%, I mean, hopefully most of you are under that, but if you get taxed at 50%, now you actually get taxed the one coin that was your real income, and you end up with literally 0 net income for your staking activity. So the more percent of the network stakes, the more of what you see on the accounting side is actually fake revenue, right? And so that's fine, that doesn't destroy the system, but you have to account for that. You have to basically if you talk I don't know, so if a network says, oh, we have 7% staking yield, but also 70% of the network stake, then what you should think is, okay, so you have 2% staking yield, because out of that 7%, 5% is just offsetting the inflation in the system, right? So basically, the argument there was just we should understand that for Ethereum, basically, we have this choice. Either we are on the side where only a small sub portion of the network stakes, in which case most of what they earn is real income, or we go to the world where most of the network stakes, in which case it's barely any real income. Mostly it's just a duty. You could imagine at 100%, literally you just have to stake if you want to hold ETH, right? You don't actually gain anything from, because at 100%, who would pay you that money, right? It's literally just everyone's balance goes up by the same amount. So it's really like, of course, that's a theoretical extreme case, but basically like in that entire range, like to a high percent stake, it's mostly just like, you know, it's just a duty. Everyone has to help secure the network. And we personally think that we should basically make this choice. Either we stick with what Ethereum was supposed to be, like you actually stake as a revenue driven, like as a, you know, as the profitable like service, then we should really stay in like the 10-20% staked range. Or we embrace the everyone participates in staking, then we should like enshrine some sort of delegation mechanism into the protocol and just like have literally all of ETH participate in security. So that was kind of the main argument that we were making there. We have supplementary arguments. Maybe the one I want to very briefly mention. I hope I'm probably out of time.
30
but like
seconds.
Yeah, we call it network effects of money. It's just the point that like basically ETH is currently used pretty widely in like Uniswap pools, in Aave, in like on OpenSea as the unit of account and all these kind of places. If at some point there would be a different, like an LST that had higher liquidity than all of the remaining raw ETH, you could imagine that over time the deepest Uniswap pool, the primary volume on OpenSea, that would all no longer be in ETH, that would be in like CBETH, STETH, RETH, whatever. Now pick your favorite, and that would have two downsides. One would be just that like it means now the base money of the network would no longer be like a completely trustless asset, but also it would mean that like now within the LST world it would have like a super centralizing effect, because you would want to hold the LST that actually is useful on Uniswap, not the other one, right? And so in that market it would really become like a winner take most market. So that's like one of the other arguments for why, even independent of this weird accounting thing, we also just really we are really worried about the implications once we go to like 50, 60, 70% staked. And for now we just keep having more and more stake in. Like, yeah, there was...
And that's why we're having
Yeah.
a conversation about what to do.
Sorry.
No, thanks. This was great. Sasha, you were next on the schedule. So should have we have some other mics over there. Oh, and maybe we didn't really do intros, but Ansgar is a researcher at the EF. Sasha, do you want to introduce yourself? Not quite.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, so I'm a researcher at Lido. I'm actually very sympathetic to Ansgar's concerns. What I would prefer is if we were like less radical about shifting the reward curve. Like one way you can see this is, okay, my personal take, it's not a Lido take, is, okay, let's say we take as axiomatic that we don't want to have another currency displace ETH as the base money of Ethereum. Then you kind of get, okay, 50% staking ratio is kind of the highest you can go, right? Given the current churn limit, I think even with the current reward curve, it's going to take, what, 4 years, quickest? We can check. I think it's close to 4. I think it's close to 2, but it's several years before we get close to that. And like, I'm of the opinion of we should actually minimally change the reward curve until we get very close to that, and then see. For one big reason, which is we actually don't know how changing yields, even by small amounts right now, will affect the distribution of stake. And I think, as Ansgar agrees, we're in quite a healthy place now with respect to how stake is distributed. You have in the past, yeah, okay. So my main concern is if we do cut yields now at this staking ratio, that we actually end up centralizing things. And my main concerns right now are sort of the staking ETF tailwinds now that Trump is in power, and the fact that kind of Coinbase has cornered that US market. So I think we're going to see a lot of inflows towards Coinbase, possibly driven by BlackRock, and it's hard to predict exactly how that's going to play out. In 2 years' time, I think we're going to have a much better read on that, but we risk making that problem a lot worse inadvertently. Yeah, that's kind of like my 2 cents there.
Thank you. Artem, you had the last talk on the topic. Sorry. Okay, yeah. Second to last then.
Hello. Nice. Yeah, so my name's Artem. I'm a researcher at Cyberfund. So the viewpoints that I want to bring are I guess there are two main ones. One is very high level, one is very low level practical. The high level point that I would actually love to discuss today is what to optimize for and what framework should we in general use thinking about these questions. Because, I mean, as researchers, I also myself love diving into various models and interesting things and et cetera, et cetera. But if we want to do it in a, let's say, in a coordinated, unified way, we need to find some sort of framework, some sort of North Star. And as a starting point, I would suggest to think about three things. One is network, Ethereum. Another is asset, ETH. And a third one is stakers. And yeah, I would suggest to discuss it. Like, in my opinion, network Ethereum is by far the most important thing. That's why we stake. That's what we secure. And stakers are very important to us because they safeguard the network, right? Not just because they're stakers, it's because they safeguard the network. So network first in that respect, but also within the asset, like, the asset is a tricky thing, but ultimately, I don't think there's a world where Ethereum fails but ETH succeeds. I think there's the arrow from the network to asset is much stronger than the arrow from asset to network. So in my personal opinion, we really need to focus on network and its security as the main guiding principle. Not to say that we need to forget about other things, but this should be the thing that we analyze first and make it right, and then the rest we need to, let's say, make viable. But yeah, I mean, would love to discuss. And then the second topic is more practical, low level. I would say, there's a whole staking economy actually built on top of Ethereum. There's solo stakers, 10%, but then there's 90% of delegated staking economy. And there's various parties there. There's centralized exchanges where stake is very concentrated with Coinbase and Binance. Then there's staking service providers like Kiln, Figment, P2P, and et cetera. There's a very competitive market there with very different fees, by the way. And we can dive into that as well, like the fees for CSPs, centralized staking providers for direct staking is from 1% to 5%. And then like centralized exchanges charge 25. So you see that these are different market segments. And then there's of course LSTs and LRTs, which are not really staking providers. Those are middlewares where people send ETH, they get liquidity, the receipts, and then those parties distribute that ETH among various either centralized staking providers, like for example, Lido distributes among 40 of those, uniformly really adding decentralization to the network, or like Rocket Pool or community staking module of Lido, they actually distribute it among solo stakers. So that's another market, right? And there, like a typical fee structure is 10%, higher than in CSPs, but because there's liquidity, it offsets a little bit. So yeah, and to me, it's important to discuss this and try to understand in either scenario of cutting issuance, not cutting issuance, et cetera, what actually happens. Like talk to these people, find out cost structures, and et cetera, et cetera. So I want to bring that practical approach to the table. And also just to speed run, like we did an analysis in our maximum viable security paper. So by the way, the framework that we suggest is to network first, security and neutrality of the network first. And so in that paper, we show that actually cutting issuance is dangerous in terms of stake concentration. Coinbase has 15% of staked ETH, and it can grow to to basically 34% if we cap the staking ratio at 33%. Yeah, so just need to be aware of all those factors, analyze. So this practical approach, in my opinion, hyper important. And then also do the relative analysis. If you cut issuance, this happens. If you don't cut, or you do something else, this happens. And then do like an informed decision in a uniform way, unified way. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, last but not least, Anders. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Do you hear me? Yeah, so I'm going to try to explain why are we doing this, like the motivation at the basic level here first. And so you can think of all the participants in the Ethereum network that are prospective ETH token holders. They have different, what we refer to as reservation yield, you know, the lowest yield at which they're willing to stake. And we can begin by just drawing some sort of, you know, distribution of what these sort of reservation yields might look like, something like this. Right, some sort of normal distribution. So some people are willing to stake at, here is now yield, and here is amount of stake. So some people are willing to stake at a very low yield, and some people would like to stake at a very high yield. And if you are at some specific yield where your reservation yield is, that's the point where you are indifferent to staking or holding the token. Okay, you're starting from that. Now we take the cumulative distribution of this sort of PDF. So we take sort of the CDF of this PDF. The recording, so we have to. Okay, so now we take the cumulative of that one, and then we are forming the supply curve, looking something like this. I'm just drawing it very simply now. All right. So if you are here, that's a certain point, and now we say that we have yield here, and we have the deposited stake here. So if you are here, then you are indifferent to staking. If you are positioned here, you are indifferent to staking at this specific yield. So this is the marginal reservation yield at this specific point. And this is so the supply curve is the marginal reservation yield. And now we draw sort of a demand curve specified by the protocol. All right. And so there becomes an equilibrium here. And what happens is that the protocol pays this amount of ETH, right? The area here. And below the supply curve, we would like to claim that everything below the supply curve is the cost to Ethereum's users, because they were indifferent at that point. Right. So here are the cost, and here is the surplus for staking. And so the problem, so one of the main motivations for reducing issuance is that we reduce the cost for staking. And the cost, we're talking about, you know, you have to buy hardware. You have to spend time for upkeep. You have to pay taxes. You have to do whatever. You know, you're taking on a risk premium, etc. So when we reduce issuance to a lower reward curve, that is the demand curve, something like this, we get a new equilibrium here. And what happens is that we reduce, we get this area is the new issuance here. And we have reduced this area here, we have removed. These are costs that we have removed by reducing issuance. That's the key property. That's a welfare gain of reducing issuance. There is also a shift in surplus, right? This surplus is shifted from stakers to all token holders. And so this area here is the welfare gain. That's the main reason. And we don't really care about shifting surplus. Like, okay, it's nice perhaps that everyone, because what happens is that these are removed and we have fewer newly minted tokens and everyone gains from it, right? So perhaps it's nice that everyone can share equally in this, but this is the key aspect. We're reducing the cost. And so I just wanted to be clear about the main reason for doing the issuance reduction. And then there's how to explain this. So there's an equation from my thread on minimum violation that sort of started this whole conversation, and it looks like this. You have a change in what do you call it, proportional yield or real yield, or change in the ownership of the protocol, how the attainable change in the proportion of the circulating supply for US user. I refer to it as EP, and it equals 1 plus y divided by 1 plus s, where s is the inflation rate and y is the yield, minus 1. And so this equation specifies how a change in issuance affects you as a user. Y yield, that is issuance yield and MEV yield. Inflation rate, that is the issuance rate. The newly issued tokens is a plus, and the burn rate is a minus. Right. And so if we have this financial equation, what happens here is that if you are a staker and you are positioned here, what happens to you is that you remain staking because the yield has not fallen down to the new yield is here. Here is the new yield. So the yield has not fallen below your reservation yield. So you remain as a staker. Your gain is this area plus that area spread out over everyone. Your loss is this distance here. This is the reduction in yield for you. So Y goes down and S goes down. And if S goes down more, then you gain. If Y goes down more, you lose. And it depends on the slope of the supply curve. That is what affects you as a user. And so we should be clear here about talking about why we're doing it. We're doing it because of the cost reduction. It's not specifically that we're doing it to increase the real yield. That depends on the slope of the supply curve. So you could express it as sort of like whatever. Yeah. So and the point being that, how should I say this? The point being that the real yield is always constant when taken in aggregate. Because if you are a staker and you are here, you previously earned this much yield. Y was pretty high for you. Now it's 0. It's nothing. You earn no yield at all. You go down there, right? But if you take it in aggregate, what actually happens is that these are all the only losses that happens. These people here, marginal distributed here on the supply curve, they lose a distribution. Whereas these might gain or lose depending on the shape of the supply curve, how Y and S changes. And everyone here who didn't stake before, they gain, of course, because they have Y0 from the beginning, so it doesn't matter to them. Right. And so it encapsulates that YP is in aggregate doesn't change, The real yield is always constant in aggregate because you're just pushing tokens around. Right? It's affected by the revenue of the protocol, the burn rate. And so that's like the main, what we're trying to do is we're trying to increase sort of the revenue of the protocol. But we do the issuance reductions to reduce the cost. Yeah, that's it, perhaps. Yeah. Oh, I want to make one short thing more. Yeah. Okay, 30 seconds. So that's one reason, the cost reduction. The second being the macro perspective. Once we reduce issuance, when not everyone is staking, the consensus layer becomes better at protecting users in the case where the social layer needs to step in. Because if everyone is staking, there's a problem because then we cannot rely on the social layer because they have stake. Everyone has stake in the game, And once there's an issue, censorship, something where we would like the social layer to step in, we have a problem. So that's the other reason.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, you can join us. So I guess as a non-researcher and someone who spends a lot of time on Twitter, My sense is there's one of the, I don't know, biggest pushbacks or concern is just like, should we change the curve at all, right? Like, sort of criticism you can make of Ethereum is, you know, we constantly fiddle with these things, and whether or not we get an actual, like a net better curve, we sort of degrade the overall perception of Ethereum. Josh uses the term hardness, right? It's like we degrade the hardness of the network because we're changing the assurances we've done to not only stakers whose yield is affected, but also to everyone else who uses the protocol, because they think, well, if this fundamental thing can be changed, you know, can they change something else? So I'd be curious to hear, you know, from each of you, like ideally a minute or less, like what's the case for changing the curve, or like what should the burden of proof be, and how do you feel about, I don't know, the overall perception that like touching this in and of itself is a risk, and like opens up a can of worms, and may damage like Ethereum's perception is.
Hello. Yeah. I think like we all agree actually there are macro risks and macro level risks. Whether we might disagree on like the relative weight we attach to macro level outcomes, but there are macro level risks that like feels like it's within the scope of issuance to avert. You know, like if you have a macro level outcome that looks like an existential, it could be an existential threat to Ethereum, and issuance can do something about it, then, you know, you'd be pretty stupid not to. Like, I think where we disagree on is, I think maybe burden of proof as well. Like, how much do you wait for more real world data before shifting versus like saying, okay, I'm actually going to try and predict the future. And that level of confidence, I think, is maybe where we like fundamentally, philosophically disagree.
Yeah, I think that's somewhat right, but I think basically, because we've had obviously quite a few conversations. Also, you know, like we get along quite well. Like I think we all kind of want what's best for Ethereum. We just kind of disagree, or like try and come from different starting points of what that is. And I think one of the big disagreements that we keep running into is just like the difference in opinion of like what would the precautionary principle here be? Like what is the risk-averse thing to do? And I think your position is more like, let's just wait and see. That's the thing. And I'm personally just very worried that like there's a lot of effects that are going to be very hard to reverse once we see them. For example, I didn't quite get to around saying that at the end of my part, but like I'm personally like, I think solo stakers are amazing. They are like the best that we can get in terms of stake. But also like most of the current LST participation, like if you stake with Lido today, you're probably a good guy. You're probably someone who actually is pretty aligned and made that choice because you actually thought there was a pretty decentralized Ethereum aligned like option. If you stake with Coinbase, a little bit less clear, maybe you just wanted to press the button, get money, right? But like that will get worse over time. Like the capital that's not yet in is this stake ETH, like the ETH ETFs that were not allowed to stake in the past, that will be allowed to stake. They do not care about what is best for Ethereum. They do not care about contributing to security. They just want to purely, ruthlessly profit maximize, right? Once you have a situation established where like the normal form of participating in Ethereum, in ETH upside on Wall Street is the stake ETH ETF, that's never going to go away again, right? Like once that's set up, it's not going to like be taken off the market. But you can prevent it from being set up in the first place by just signaling, hey, we are changing the issuance. We're basically like, it's not just like massive free money we are pushing towards you. Like it's not, it was never supposed to reach Wall Street, right? That this is not money for Wall Street. This is money for the small guys at home that try to put it, right? I mean, easier said than done, but like I'm just saying, right? Or like layer 2 bridges, same thing. Like there's one, I don't want to name them, but like one layer 2 that does the thing where like if you stake, if you move your ETH to them, they still call it ETH, but actually what happened is under the hood, they take it and they stake it, and if something goes wrong, I guess too bad for you, you know, like, but basically like for now, that's only the ruthless L2s that do that, but like if ever this kind of is some sort of like a cascade of like, well, the semi-ruthless L2 does it, and then the next one feels pressure to do it, and the next one, like once you set that up in your logic, you're never gonna undo it again, right? So either we basically send a clear signal now, like stop, that's not where we are trying to go, or I think a lot of these effects will be almost impossible to undo. And that's why to me the precautionary principle is like, let's try to hold staking like at the current rough level, figure out what to do in the long term, or maybe even, you know, like try to jump there now, but like just doing nothing is not the risk-averse thing to do.
So I just want to because I think there's some great points there, but I think we do have a fundamental disagreement on like a subset of them. Like I think if we did have like some sort of staking yield, whereby or curve where we're sure this does not centralize the validator set forever, and we're sure it avoids staking ETFs from people from participating in staking ETFs, I think we would do it, right? I think what we disagree on is like we don't know what that yield is for staking ETFs to say we're not going to come in, right? Like these customers are pretty, you look at Coinbase, they take 25% fees. I doubt most people staking on Coinbase have any idea how many, I think they could raise it to 50%, people wouldn't care. They just know they're making something, as opposed to nothing. And so like, this is where we disagree on, and it's like, I think having some more real world data on this would help us make a more confident decision. And I think it's not irreversible as long as we don't surpass this sort of 50% threshold, and we have a few years to get to there. So that's kind of where, well, I mean, we can disagree on this, but that's kind of where we, reasonably disagree. That's where we disagree. Yeah, I mean, this is why we're here.
Yeah. So a couple things. First, yeah, as an answer to Tim's question, I think, the right thing is to do the precautionary thing. Agree there. But yeah, so the fundamental disagreement is, of course, in like precautions against what? And this comes back to what I sort of started with is, what are we optimizing for? Is it network security, or is it asset? And, like to me, it's really non-obvious, like what are the problems with large amounts of ETH staked? So we can discuss that. But for me, for example, it's pretty, let's say from where I stand and what I see of the staking economy is that the issuance cut will only exacerbate the issues that you were talking about staking ETFs, stake concentration, etc. So to me, the precautionary thing actually would be to not do that. And the reason is because customers of, let's say, Coinbase are very inelastic. How do we know that they're inelastic? Is because they pay 25% on their yield, and everyone else pays max 10. So, well, okay, max 14, I guess. But it's two different market segments, and the issuance cut will be felt by the market segment which is not Coinbase, is the sophisticated actors with decentralized pools, with staking service providers. Those will be scratching their head and thinking, what can I do with my money? And retail institutions on Coinbase, they will not, okay, I mean, some of them will, but to a much less degree, they will be thinking what to do after issuance cut. So this is the precautionary principle for me, is to by default not do it, and then I'm in principle not against actually changing it, but I would say that we need to do way more research and way more real world research, and go out and talk to these people. And that's why at Cyberfund we had a MBI grants program. We have 5 teams doing exactly that, talking to various people and projecting, thinking what will actually happen. And also, yeah, but also circling back to the main issue, I would actually would love to ask you and maybe the audience, what do you feel like we need to optimize for? Is it network or the asset?
I would call that a leading question.
Which one? Sorry, which one?
I just to say, I would call that a leading question. I don't think those are in conflict, and I don't think it is. For example, just to briefly mention, right? One of the main reasons to move from proof of work to proof of stake in the first place was that on paper you can make the argument that proof of stake has massively higher efficiency, and that's specifically because on proof of work, the money you spend as a miner actually goes into hardware that then deprecates and depreciates, and basically just all of the money actually is an expense. Whereas in proof of stake, yes, you put that money at risk to be slashed, but you only actually pay the opportunity cost of the extra yield you could earn on top, right? So basically, there's this factor of 20 or so in efficiency of capital, or 10, depending on how quickly the asset depreciates. But you have this massive efficiency gain, and then on top of that, proof of work, once it's broken, it's broken. Like if the attacker controls 51% of the money, they can always re-attack and re-attack and re-attack. In proof of stake, if you attack, you get targeted, and like you can only punish the attacker, which you can't do in proof of work. So for these two reasons, in principle, proof of stake is like massively more efficient. If you look at the real numbers today, Bitcoin has a net inflation of 0.9%, which of course will go to zero over time, and then they just don't pay for security anymore, whatever. But like Ethereum, 0.8%. Oh, so we are actually, and rising, right? So like soon we'll cross over and we'll have higher, of course, pre-burn, like Bitcoin just doesn't have the burn. So like, yes, we kind of nicely on the account, like in the net, you know, like it looks nicer, but in terms of how much we pay, Ethereum currently pays $3 billion every year for security, right? We actually looked at the list of countries by government budget, and actually that would put us above 60 countries on Earth. Like 60 countries have an entire government budget that's below $3 billion yearly. So we pay, and I would argue, like in terms of just the pure money at stake side, and that's of course only half of the picture. The other half is the distribution, but like we literally are currently overpaying by a factor of 10, 20, 50, 100 on Ethereum. We could literally, like purely on that, like we could, if we only shrink down, you know, again, we can't, there's no way to do that, but if we only shrink down to the solo stakers, like, yeah, so I'm just saying it's not like we are close to a breaking point. We are massively currently.
What's your ideal staking ratio, though, Anders? What's your ideal?
Ideal, 3%, 5%.
3% stake.
Like I don't think we can get there, but ideal, yeah.
You know that Coinbase controls 15%, right,
Yeah.
of the staked ETH.
Beautiful world where like we can pick the 3%.
Yeah, but the market. I mean, what you going to do in the to the market? The market has its own preferences and its own incentives.
Yeah, so I wanted to sort of go back to the beginning of this conversation. Like, let's talk about first. There was a statement that there's no risk really if everyone stakes, and I mentioned one aspect in the end, sort of like you're saying it's better for security. Yeah.
I mean, you know, from the asset perspective, you know, there's different things, but from the security perspective, yes.
Yeah. So my point would be, it's not just about. I mentioned one of the macro perspectives, being that we should have, you know, a neutral social layer ready to intervene in the case that we have censorship or we have some, you know, client power or whatever. There's also several other reasons for not wanting to have all ETH stake. First of all, it's easy to understand that, you know, if you increase the number of attestations, and we're already trying to do SSF. So if we can decrease the number of the total aggregate number of attestations by a factor of 5 relative to if everyone stakes, then of course we are moving to a faster security just from that angle, so to speak. Or you can always substitute that for having lower stake, minimum stakes. Yeah. Does it work?
No, I was going to say, I'm not sure how much people here understand the idea that SSF is bounded by the amount of gossip. Like, do you mind explaining?
All right. So we are trying to do something called single slot finality. And we want to finalize the chain in one single slot, but it's not really single slot anymore, it's several slot finality. So that's a new meaning of SSF. And we are bounded by the number of attestation that we have to process. And if we reduce the quantity of stake, of course then we would suspect that the number of attestations that we have to process in aggregate goes down, at least to the proportion that we reduce the stake. And then, so that's the second reason. So then the third reason being that if you are also not just compromising the consensus layer, you are compromising the app layer. Because if you have this situation where one or a few LSTs comes to dominated money, they will have, you know, if you have the power of the money, you get sort of a power over users, and you get sort of power over the applications. And it can be rather subtle, but it's gonna creep in everywhere, you know. And the fourth reason being that if you have people then starting building on top of the LST, you know, not on top of ETH, but on top of the LST, and then there is an issue. You're compromising, you know, the entire ecosystem. And I wanted to. Oh no, you can intervene if you.
I guess one thing I was going to say on that is, yeah, so if you have all these liquid staking tokens, people treat them as money. You know, in a world where like 100% of ETH is stake, maybe there's like one that's dominant that has half of that, so like half the ETH is like a single LST. If I'm like a new user, I open Coinbase and it's like Coinbase is selling me, you know, ETH, but it's actually, you know, I don't know, wrapped staked ETH or, you know, wrapped Coinbase ETH or whatever. There's a sense of like, if there's ever a bug in that contract, the user will like think that's Ethereum, right? And you know, say in a world where there's like 3% staked, you really have to go and find that LST, right? Like if you're there and you know you've like, I don't know, bought it on some Uniswap pool, and like hopefully you know what you're doing, and if you don't, and there's some bug with that LST, 97% of people will just tell you, well, you know, you put your money in a sketchy app and you lost your money, and that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. But there's a risk if it's the opposite. You know, if there's like 97% in an LST, there's a bug. Then as much as, you know, we want to say like, well, it was just an app, it's like less credible to say that as a user. And so what you're, I guess, getting at with the social ledger is like, as long as you're like under 50%, you're kind of in a good spot because half the ETH is like raw ETH. So maybe like, why is the Strawman proposal of like having a curve that, I don't know, it's like a very sharp parabola that like, I don't know, we want like some security, so it like goes up really quick in the beginning and then drops like down and goes like ultra negative past 50%. Like, why wouldn't that be the like peak? Well, if we're saying that we don't want, you know, more than 50...
It's a zero, let's say. What is the...
Yeah. Well, MEV is like a thing. Anyways, okay. But anyways,
Assuming MEV
I guess the point is like, why shouldn't we just have a curve that like goes up a ton in the beginning, does whatever in the middle, and then like sharply discourages right before 50%? Why don't we just ship that? Like, what's the issue with that curve?
Yeah, well, so I wanted to talk about the curve and relate it to the Coinbase comments. So the curves that we are discussing, they aren't as such as, so the comment saying that there are 50 million ETH at Coinbase, or for example, something like this. The curves, the primary curves that we're discussing wouldn't like make it impossible to stake beyond 50 million ETH. They're just the yield falls slightly, but it's not like the yield goes negative of 50 million ETH staked or something like this. So it's not like Coinbase can just push all their ETH into the deposit contract and push out everyone else. And so that's the reason why we would like to have a little bit more than 50 million ETH negative or zero yield, because then we are taking away this power from one actor to sort of push everyone out for whatever reasons they would have for doing so. So the curve is slightly falling because it sort of let us balance these different forces. And yeah, I want to just a short intervene another thing also. And it's nice when we're talking about proof of stake and we're comparing it to proof of work. If you remember, I talked about a cost and a surplus. And it's only half, if you have a supply curve, it's only half that is a cost. The other half is a surplus. So when we say that, okay, if Ethereum issues as much tokens as proof of work, only half of that is actually a cost to the Ethereum users. The other half, or something like this, will be a surplus, depending on the slope of the supply curve. So that's something to remember also in terms of welfare.
Yeah, just very for context, like yeah, there are different curves being discussed. Some of them that are more gradual to like avoid anyone being able to push extra ETH in and push other people out. Others that are more kind of more like opinionated in going to zero or something. I think the focus on the curves is a bit premature because I really think, I mean, I hope, again, like we've refocused a little bit on just like trying to more just raise awareness, because it really turns out that like it's a fundamentally hard problem to solve. It is just not obvious what we could just pick and then everything is fine, right? Like I think hopefully we convinced most people here, or like maybe you were already convinced pre-today, that like there is a problem, but it does not mean necessarily we convinced you that even we would have to do anything. Maybe today's kind of path is still the best out of bad outcomes, basically. I don't think so, but like it's definitely not obvious which one is the best path. But fundamentally, I more strongly get this feeling that, like, you know, basically we wanted, again, when the mechanism was designed, it was really only designed with solo stakers in mind. That would have been like 3-5% participation. It turns out that attracted a lot of like professional capital. I don't even like, you know, like I would love a world where no LSTs exist. Given that LSTs have to exist, I like that Lido exists. So I don't want to, you know, like Lido's great, but still, you know, like it attracted a lot of like mercenary capital, and like now out of those $3 billion we pay, like maybe 300 million, 10% go to solo stakers, and 2.7 billion just goes to people who don't care about Ethereum, right? Or like at least care less, or like basically like don't add to the security. I'd feel much more comfortable with just the 10% of solo stakers, right? So like most of our payment already goes kind of is wasted in that sense, right? And so the problem is, how do we definancialize in a sense, right? Like staking while keeping it attractive for solo stakers. They are like ideas. So for example, it's not a good idea, but like one thing we could do is we could like really have a very narrow yield, at the same time remove all of the concerns of solo stakers. So like, for example, make the slashing penalty, if it's not correlated, very, very low, basically almost non-existent. Keep reducing the hardware requirements, like really keep, like, say with something like APS, where you no longer participate in block proposing, so like there's no timing issues. You don't have to have like a really ultra fast bandwidth to make sure that, you know, you're like not too late with the block and stuff. So make it as friendly to solo stakers as possible, bring the yield quite a bit down, and then ramp up the correlated penalty even more, so that like someone like Coinbase, right, basically would, I think they even have some sort of slashing insurance or something, like would have to pay so much for that, because, you know, like if they do something wrong, it really blows up, right? Correlation penalty is just like if you run a bunch of validators that have the same voting behavior, or like say you all double sign at the same time, then basically like your per validator penalty is much higher than if it was just a single person doing a mistake, right? Because anyone who would attack the network would have to do it with a bunch of stake, and so the accidental mistake by an honest person, just we don't want to punish. So in that world, right, you could make it so unattractive to be a concentrated entity, and at the same time Coinbase, you know, they have to actually pay professional people to run this in a professional data center. That is extra cost that an enthusiast just doesn't have. So I think that corner, it's not a super attractive corner, but at least like it is plausible that you could reach some sort of point there where the only people staying in are the 3-5% of solo stakers. Maybe you can make that work. And I think the only alternative that I see that is attractive is the just enshrined delegation into the protocol and completely remove staking rewards. Like no one earns anything from staking anymore. It just becomes a duty. If you want to participate in Ether, in Ethereum, you want to hold ETH, now you just have to delegate, like make a delegation decision and right, and basically participate in securing the network. I think those extremes are the only stable, potentially stable points that we can choose from. But genuinely, honestly, if we come out of this and we just all agree there's a problem and it's generally hard to find a solution, then we should definitely keep working on it. And maybe our disagreement is not so much that we should keep working on it, just like what do we do in the meantime?
Can I comment? Yeah. So actually, yeah. I mean, you know, one thing that I want to also say that we should search for the end game, right? And that's what we're doing right now. But I'm not sure if there is an end game. So we need to keep this in mind, that actually we are like in a very dynamic industry where things didn't shake out completely. So that's just a philosophical remark. But towards the points that you discussed, so yeah, like, so first, you know, we want a decentralized validator set. How can we achieve it? And there's one sort of clear thing that that we can say is that the centralized staking provider solutions are way cheaper. They're extremely cheap, and decentralized are expensive because you run it on multiple nodes. And that's the reason why L1 market cap is so high, is because the costs that L1s incur are just immense in general. Okay, so given that, you know, the question, let's do a hypothetical. We have the market, we cut the issuance. Okay, what will be the effect? And in my mind, it's just completely like we cannot hope for like professional people to leave and then only enthusiasts stay. I don't see this happening. I think, you know, whatever is on the table will be, you know, will be basically, will go to the majority will go to the market, and then the rest will go to the enthusiasts. So the kind of the distribution will be very similar, if not worse. And let me maybe go a little bit into detail, like, as I guess I'm repeating this point, but it's very relevant. You cut the issuance. You want to look at most inelastic people. Those are the ones who will stay. And I mean, I agree that, for example, solo stakers are very diverse. Is a very diverse set of people. So their supply curve is pretty steep. You know, they are pretty. You know, it's likely that there will be, in percentage-wise, less solo stakers leaving than, let's say, those who stake with LSTs, marginally. That's probably, yeah, I agree with this analysis. However, what I really want to point out that stakers with centralized exchanges, I don't even think they will notice, to be honest. So they are the most inelastic people, and we should be worried about those. And then also, like, solo staker viability long term, not clear to me. We did an analysis in our paper of cost structure of solo stakers, and in our analysis basically implies that the solo staker curve is rather steep at first, marginally, but then it flattens out at some point because of high fixed costs, and they're just inflexible to change their cost structure. So yeah, I mean, and so maybe, like, let me end with a positive note, because all I said is, like, you know, it's not going to work or something. Here's a view that I have, that I personally think there is a sustainable equilibrium where we allow all market segments to coexist, both, let's say, retail and then half institutional segment with centralized exchanges, and then also the decentralized market segment, on-chain market segment. The reason why I think it's sustainable to do so, because, I mean, you know, this argument is thrown around a lot, like margins will compress either way everything will centralize. Let's just accelerate this. I don't think that's how it works, and the reason is because it's up to us, right? If we want to the network to be decentralized, we want to keep, you know, finding a solution, right? So it's really up to us. And second, I think the market is segmented, as I said, and for Coinbase and Binance right now, the optimal strategy is not to lower their fees and compete with others. It's actually to charge a lot of fees from their smaller customer base. And if you think about investments, right, investment industry as a whole, like, there's this passive investment industry where your money is for 1K or somewhere, and then it goes to some other people. Those people send it to some other people, and you really have no idea what's happening. This is like, I would say, you pay like a lot of money when you do this, and actually there's a lot of people doing that. And then there's a professional segment, right, where you LP in funds, et cetera, et cetera. So it's investment as a market is a very segmented market. And I think there's a good chance that actually staking market will be a segmented market with a decentralized component and a centralized kind of retail-friendly component. So that's a positive note. I feel like there's room for segments.
It's working? Yeah, so I want to, like, riff on the things that has been said. Like, I was shaking. Oh yeah, yeah. By the way, yeah. So Sasha, like the thing you said, like, oh, we have some time, like 4 years or like 2 years. I was shaking my head because, like, it's hard to predict things on the past performance when you have bull runs, and if you have ETH that stake ETF. Like ETH stake ETFs, it's very hard to predict where it's going to go. And we've seen it even this week, like what happened with Bitcoin was absolutely crazy. And yeah,
this was just looking at the churn limit. Like, it's actually like mathematically impossible to have more deposits. Technically impossible. You know, that's all. It was just a comment.
Yeah. Okay. But like my main point is we have these few parts, like solo stakers, Lido, like liquid stakers, and these, as you said, like very inelastic people who just want to get anything on Coinbase. And I think it's going to be the same with ETFs. Like, if I can get ETH or I can get ETH plus 0.5%, it doesn't matter for me because I don't have that much money. But if I put $1 billion, 0.5% is a lot of money. And I am actually, well, that would be very pessimistic, but I'm actually not sure what could we do with issuance unless we go to zero to actually prevent that, because if it really happens that these ETFs become the dominant force because these people have a lot of money, then even if it's 0.5%, it's still a lot of money for them. If you have like billion or 100 billion in the ETF, that's like, you know, you just print cash.
Yeah. I guess one addition to your question is, then why not go negative? Because if you, oh, sorry. To add to what you say, it's like, why wouldn't you then make the issuance negative? Because imagine we have a pre-ETF equilibrium where it's like 0.05, but then BlackRock looks at it and it's like, well, if we shove our ETH in, we're going to bring it down to minus 5%, and people are going to call us because they're losing ETH, and that's not great. So couldn't we just do that with negative issuance?
Can I just mention that I think that negative issuance, but at a point that is beyond 50% staked, that you go to infinite negative beyond 50% stake. For me, this is the second best option. The best option is what I would like to. I just want to show what I think is the best option. Oh fuck!
That should be a regular segment. Whiteboarding with others.
So in my perspective would be that this is the current issuance. It rises all the way up to 1.8 million ETH, right? And so we find this problematic because it will not. People will be encouraged, we suspect, to stake at a very high stake participation rate. And so this is something that I find to be like the best option, like what I would suspect being the best option. I don't know where this is. I was just trying to draw it now, but you can look at the practical endgame post outlining this sort of curves. And with the point being that we are, when we are here somewhere, we aren't really. We would like the equilibrium to be here, perhaps. Say that it's between 20 to 30 million, something like this, where we are just beyond this peak here. So this is what we would like, but we are not like forcing the outcome that it has to be there. It doesn't has to be there. Even if you go beyond here, you are still issuing. We are not forcing it. And so the second best option, in my view, would be that if you are going to force it, if this is for sort of 0.5, like half the ETH or something like this, maybe it's 0.6 actually. Yeah. Anyway, if you're going to force it, you force it somewhere above 50%. So here somewhere, you go to negative infinity, something like that. But my preference would be to have it like this, so that we always give the solo staker a small positive regular reward, and to be able to achieve this, because we have to remember that the reward curve is the max issuance. Then you would like to have slightly above zero.
The way we thought about it, and like I think it's quite helpful, is to say, hey, if we have a curve anything like this, right, just as an example, either of the two, like once you go beyond this point, you're already in the failure case. Like you really try to prevent this range, right? You really want it to be somewhere over here. So you have to kind of acknowledge, hey, I'm only designing here for like, how do we want to fail? And of course, we always want to fail as graciously as possible. And so here, kind of like going to negative infinity, yes, it might have like a nice scale effect once you get close, but if you actually get there, that's really not the most elegant failure case, right? Like now you're like, well, if you're a solo staker, well, sorry about you, you know, boom. And so I think actually just accepting that, okay, our cap just didn't hold. Even though I don't love it, I'd rather pick that failure case, again, assuming we never get there, but like, I think it I think that mental model of just saying like, this part of the curve is only about finding the best off-ramp we have, and if everything goes wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I just want to show, like, do we actually, like, are not as misaligned as it seems. Like,
I was about to find you validate IDs and like.
like what I suggested yesterday in my talk, and again, this is just like one is to actually, because okay, the current stake what is like something like here. Let's say we're here on the curve.
30% roughly.
Yeah, let's just say it's this curve's not quite proportionate, but it's to actually just like, can we look at what Anders has done, and he's done incredible work, honestly, and it's a very beautiful read. If you have a spare month to go through everything, I highly recommend it. Is to just, okay, can we say, okay, we actually don't know, if we shift now to this, we don't know how that's going to centralize the set, right? We just don't have enough data to be confident. Can we do something whereby we stick as close as possible to the current reward curve at the current rate of staking ratio, and then come back down towards joining, Anders's curves? If you look at it properly, there's kind of like a range of curves, but to sort of come in at around 50%, similar to what he's suggesting. Like, that's one possible way of doing it. The other sort of suggestion is, okay, you keep going to closer to 50% stake along the current reward curve, and then you have something more drastic, right? So for me, it's like, it's more along what is the range here, and for sort of Anders, it's what is the range here, and there is an intersection at higher amounts staked.
Why keep it at that current curve if not only to cater to the people who are supposed to be serving the network?
Can you reformulate?
Well, why keep it to that curve? Because is it only to cater to saving those people's jobs?
No, it's just because we don't know what's going to happen if we shift the current yield at the current staking rate. Like,
But
we
we've
could
been
have
at
a situation when this comes to sort of the market segmentation argument, whereby we have a staking ETF. Lido's margins, for example, are compressed. We cannot fund a distributed validator set, and most of the stake ends up going to Coinbase, right? Like, we don't know yet. We haven't had enough research. Like, I would prefer a wait-and-see approach where, okay, we acknowledge that we agree we don't want to get past this 50%, or at least not overshoot a lot. How long do we have to gather enough data to see these staking ETFs go out, to see what happens before we react?
Very briefly, because I think it's very important, we talked about it earlier. We actually re-looked at the numbers just to double check, but at the current, because yes, the system defines a maximum rate at which new ETH is allowed to come into the system, but it's actually quite a bit higher. Like, we roughly could have 20% of extra stake inflow per year at the current maximum limit. So within a single year, we could go. Of course, right now we are not at all at that level of inflow. But say once staked ETFs become a thing or something, we could, in principle, go from today's 30% to 50% within a single year. And if you've ever seen Ethereum try to ship any feature, like from even proposing a specific feature to it going live and impacting this, that would be a year, 2 years, 3 years, right? So there is some urgency. Although I agree with you, yeah.
So,
Sorry, what's the camera? Bumblefoot. I was just gonna I actually loved the formulation of market segments and market structure, and I think like just like stepping back 3 steps, I feel like there's something interestingly like it's sort of like a central bank with one arm tied behind its back that like doesn't want to use half the terminology available to it. So when I hear about like de minimis thresholds or like molding behavior to enable multiple market segments to have different reward structures, feels like the political and, to be blunt, the regulatory has crept back in. Like, everyone just sort of pretends if we don't call this a central bank, it's not a central bank. But this is a central bank. You're talking about like changing the rules of the game to keep the protocol healthy.
One
and, like,
thing I'll say on that, though, is
the health of a market is a political question.
I agree with the political bit. The big difference between a central bank and like Ethereum is, Ansgar or Sasha or Anders or Artem can write a blog post, write an EIP. We can get on all Cortez and accept it, but we do need the validators and the users to run the code, right? Like when the central bank decides they do a rate cut or like a rate hike, they get in a room, they decide it, and you can't like use your dollars and like signal.
True.
So
there isn't an army.
Yeah, but it is worth noting because I think a lot of the times when we put out the code, the upgrade happens and people accept it. And usually it's because there's been this feedback loop of like, by the time we ship the thing, hopefully people like the thing. But in the case where it's not, say, I don't know, like Lido got their way and like they convinced everybody and like, or I don't know, like EF gets their way. But like the EF gets their way. I work at the EF, right? Like we get our way, we convince everybody, like, people read the blog post and they're like, wow, it comes from the EF, gotta trust it. You still choose to run the software or not. And I think that's like a super important part where, if you don't recognize that, it does feel like, this thing is like, okay, literally this closed door meeting, we're like choosing the curve for the $300 billion network. But yeah, so sorry, didn't mean to completely derail, but yeah.
No, I mean, I just think like of all the options discussed, it sounds like people are talking about different what in a regulatory plan would be like circuit breakers.
Yeah,
like,
but
like if a hugely capitalized, if like $1 trillion state actor swoops in and tries to break this, what sort of like emergency mechanisms are there to keep?
Well,
this all going
how
to
would they
zero?
break it? They break it. You mean by staking it, or
Getting to 51% quickly, for example, like.
yeah,
We're
stake.
modeling all this out, assuming
Yeah,
there
but
isn't
I mean,
drastically bigger people.
Okay, so they use
swooping
stake.
in.
They use stake it, and the yield goes down. Like
Yeah.
right. Yeah. So, I mean, they are not
And
really.
then it's just game over for a while.
but,
And then it's game over for a while. But there's no yield for anybody.
There was a question
I
in
want
the
to just
way.
make one small comment about central banking. What we're trying to do is to try to ship a one-time. We have received the feedback from the community that there's a one-time change, that people would prefer one-time change. So we are discussing a one-time change, right? This is the forever change. This is based on community feedback that this is what people want. So I wouldn't refer to it as central bank. Central banking is the constant intervention of people, in a closed-off boardroom. And so we're trying, in a way, to do the opposite, and it's sort of the blockchain way to do it, right?
In the back.
Hello. Okay. Immediate response to that, I would say that we need to make sure that the validators can bear the costs. If this is meant to be a one-time change and not to buy us time, then we absolutely need to be certain that their cost floor is lower than Coinbase and Lido, no offense, so that we don't end up with forcing the 51% attack. But my real question was, if you lower the issuance, then a greater percentage of validator profit comes from MEV. MEV is easier to centralize. You could imagine flashbots that sells only to hedge funds. This I find very concerning because now well, okay, I'll go ahead and let you respond before talking.
No, sorry, I didn't want to cut you off. Please flesh it out a little bit.
I've said enough. Oh, yeah, I've said enough already. Respond to what I said.
I just wanted to signal agreement because
okay, yeah.
MEV is a huge problem, and I think, like it has been for a long time. I think we all agree with that. There is this plan on the Ethereum roadmap to do what we call MEV burn, MEV capture, basically. That would solve that, at least it would not solve all problems with MEV, but it would solve the problems that MEV causes for staking incentives. And in particular, the nice thing is that currently we have an MEV pipeline that still gives solo stakers access to MEV in principle, but it comes, of course, with the huge variance, right? If you only propose a block once a year, you just basically play the lottery. Your EV might be the same, but your variance is terrible. So, and that becomes worse and worse the fewer people stake, right? Because the fewer people stake, the more concentrated the MEV payouts are for those people. So I agree with you. Ideally, of course, the problem really is in general the timelines. Like, yes, we can basically just, and that might be what ends up happening, right? We just do nothing until we have like the perfect solution completely locked in, right? But that then includes MEV burn, which is probably also still like 1 or 2 years away from actually being shippable and all these kind of things. But at the same time, there's also just a lot of pressure into the system, right? So it really feels like basically the challenge for Ethereum, because yes, the idea is not to be the Fed and make changes every single year. We do one or two changes, right? Like either a short-term change to pause the system and then a long-term solution, or we wait and then ship one-term solution, right? Either way, but we have to ramp up our economic sophistication very rapidly and get to a solution point as soon as we possibly can.
I I like to push back on this. So I've personally worked on 2 or 3 difficulty bomb pushbacks that were the last one before the merge. I think we have a very poor track record of saying we're going to do things once and then realizing that the world was more complicated. To use the notepad myself, it seems like there's like a lot of like a great argument surface here. Well, one idea, and I mentioned this to you this week, but it's like, could we have like shorter term bounds, right? Like saying, look, maybe the right curve is somewhere here, but we like agree that like it's not going to be, I don't know, like beyond that area or something like that. Like, and is there a way, like, and I'm curious to ask, like, all of you, like, is there some sort of like upper bound thing that we could agree to or get to consensus to, such that we clearly don't know the details there. There'll clearly be like second order effects, I think, as you've mentioned a couple times. But then say like, okay, we can commit forever to not like going out of this box. And, as a holder of Ether or like a staker or whatever, like I know that, rewards will never exceed X or like never go below Y. Like Ansgar, you said, we don't want to do negative issuance. Like now we trust vibes to do this, but it's like, should we have like some sort of bounding box in the protocol that says this is the like design space we've agreed to, and we'll probably get it wrong. We'll try really hard not to, but it's like, I don't know, we have like 99.9 confidence interval about this box and like maybe 95 about like the area within the box.
Yeah, so I was trying to, in my talk yesterday, pitching this idea of having this social commitment to never issuing more than 0.5% of the circulating supply each year. So it's an issuance rate of 0.5% that goes there. So and this is a bound that, from the perspective of securing Ethereum, this is at the upper end of any compromise we should ever consider. I think. So in my perspective, 0.5% would be that bound. Or if you want to go lower, I know that there's been talk about 0.25, I was saying, but we could also have 2 to the power of -8. If you want some sort of purely Ethereum, and that's 0.39%. But I don't know if this is mimetic in terms of quality, but it's very Ethereum solution also.
I think this like gets to what you're getting at. Like foundationally, I think the closest, like we don't agree on this 0.5% for the reason that I think it drastically changes the current yields at where we are now, and we don't know what happens. But I think what we're closest to agreeing on is like there is this kind of 50% thing where bad things could happen, right? That's the closest thing. Then we disagree on like whether that is more vertical, whether we should gradually soften way before, whether we should gradually soften a little bit later. And it does seem like there's something within this range. I think we have made progress, but I would say we're not, like on the 0.5%, I think it's I wouldn't say we have close to consensus on that.
But just because you said we have agreement on something, I just want to push back a little bit.
I'm not saying we have agreement. I don't say we have agreement. I say this is the closest thing.
No, but what I'm saying is, I just want to brief here because I think it's important. Like with the 50% range, like yes, I think we have a lot of concerns around like specific, say for example, this like really this concentrating pressure around a single winning LST becomes much worse in this range. That I think we agree with. That is much less of an issue over here. I just want to say as a cautionary thing, yes, I think we can wait longer and then make a one-time change. I think the change will get more and more painful as the longer we wait, and some of these processes might be very hard to reverse. So it might be that even the post outcome will be still more staked ETH and or more like staked ETH ETF and less solo staking than if we did it today. Doesn't mean maybe we still wait a little bit and then make a change. But I will fundamentally say that any equilibrium close to 50%. I'm personally very uncomfortable with, specifically because that is still a world where if I'm an ETH ETF, it looks like, oh, I'm tempted to come in and be part of that 50%. If it's 3%, I'm not trying to be part of the 3% because I already have so much money under management that like I couldn't even get a sizable allocation in there, right? Like at 3%, we could go to Coinbase and be like, please just stop staking. And they'd be like, yeah, okay, fair enough. We have way too much volume. We didn't fit into this 3%, so we stop staking, right? Like, I'm not saying we should go to 3% is extreme, right? I'm just using it as a mental model.
If you get a written note from Brian Armstrong and all his predecessors that is true, you, then maybe we agree. Actually, what we disagree on is that this will happen.
Well, this
right?
this is an action item. Let's get Brian to
like you're depending on one person. That's the issue.
I'm just saying, I just wanted to give the intuition that I think again we need more iteration on this, but I'm personally very uncomfortable with anything in that range will not stop that wave of deteriorating kind of mercenary capital inflow that I'm really afraid of over the next few years.
So something that I'm realizing here, and this goes back to his point about central banking, is that we're effectively trying to change the rules of the game to control who the participants are and what their behaviors are. Why can't we just let the participants regulate this for themselves? So as an example, participants today are, we're talking about BlackRock. Why not have regulators basically control these sorts of things in this sort of way through taxing regimes and stuff like that? That's how we currently do it today. But effectively what we're saying is we're not going to change the rules. We're going to let the participants change their strategies and behaviors within the game itself in order to self-regulate it, rather than us changing the rules, at which point we're basically going back to how central banks act today by effectively just changing the rules and having to consistently change them based upon the participants and actors and what they're doing.
Yeah, the Bank of International Settlements is probably a better analogy because it's already the SRO balancing central banks, plural.
Interesting. I mean, I'm not sure I fully got the question, but I think the way I understood it is that I would disagree with that, and specifically I disagree with that because I think fundamentally the blockchain approach to problems is to find guarantees invariance in the system that you can absolutely 100% rely. Whereas the existing world, the way you prevent a double spend is if you double spend, the government comes and knocks at your door. That is the self-regulation, right? That's the bad things could in principle happen, but if they happen, hopefully the society somehow deals with it, right? I think we really need to find a stable, an intrinsically stable endpoint, and it's really hard to see where that is, right? But I think that is the only stable long-term solution, rather than just to say, well, if an actor would misbehave, then hopefully their government would punish them, and so that's why they would never misbehave in the first place, right? I just don't fundamentally think that's not the crypto way of solving challenges.
So I agree with you on that regard, but I think where it's fundamentally different is with double spend, it's a closed ecosystem. We control the network as a whole. But the reality is when we're controlling the economics and which participants choose to participate, it's an open ecosystem, so we have less control over it, which is why I'm essentially pushing back on the idea of should we even be modifying the rules in the first place, because we're setting precedents of the future that basically walk us down the same path of central banks today.
I think it's a great question.
I don't think, again, the part of the question that is reasonable is that how willy-nilly should Ethereum just be willing to change its monetary policy? And I think there we probably all roughly agree that that should not just happen on a whim all the time. I think that probably is a baseline of agreement that we all have, and then we probably disagree on are we currently at that threshold? Should we do it? Should we not do it? That we disagree. But I think fundamentally we have to consciously design an outcome for Ethereum that works for the network, and that is our responsibility. And we can't just hope, sit back and pray. We can't just be okay, well, look, it might be that this does not work for the network, but hopefully people find a way to self-regulate into a place that works for us. I think we have to be willing to design, to be willing to on paper, and that's the central plenary part of blockchains, right? Satoshi sat down and designed on paper and theory an outcome and then built the rules. The part that's different is that it is something that is one time done, and then people can rely and can predict what will happen in the future, and it's not just a backroom dealing that constantly changes the direction, right? I think the good part of central planning is the designing the outcome. The bad part is the constantly shifting directions in closed door meetings.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to also touch on something that was super important. I think the question of possibility, is this possible? I think the question of possibility is, we need to analyze what we want, right? And what we want is to save the decentralization of the validator set, and then based on that, assess. like, and for example, like we're talking about 50%, 33%, etc. In our paper, we showed that 33% is almost, hopeless. 50%, maybe there is a chance to save the decentralization part. Actually, my hunch is that 60 to 80 would be much healthier range in which there is a chance. But yeah, like also, so, and also, by the way, like a data point, there's no blockchain where there is more stake than 66%. But there's no other blockchain as good as Ethereum, so we also have to be mindful of that. And then lastly, I want to mention something super important that I think there needs to be, like, we need to agree on the underlying mechanism and currents. Like, I'm sorry, but I just cannot agree with the fact that we can hope to lower the issuance and then only enthusiasts are left. Like, there's no place on earth where the value is distributed and then only enthusiasts are there. There's just none. So I think we have to agree on the underlying currents. The underlying current is that professionals will be there. We cannot just like hope for only enthusiasts to be there. And so, the question is, okay, like higher, more issuance, therefore more decentralization, or less decentralization? In my mind, it's more decentralization, but we need to agree on all this because I feel like there's just not enough like straight up, logic and analysis so far.
Thank you. I don't know, so it says here we have 0 minutes left, but I don't know if we can stay until 4. We'll see if they kick us off. Let's try to stay until 4. Are there people who did not ask a question that had a question? Okay, you had one, and we'll try to do like a minute each and get as many as we can.
Hi. Is there a reason why the design space is limited to a single issuance curve and not being able to partition kind of consensus roles so that you can identify these different types of people in power?
So there's 2 types of partitioning you could think of, and one of them I think is practical and the other one isn't. So the practical part is like, and that's called, I think the idea is generally called rainbow staking. The idea like, hey, right now you have one type of staking and everyone does that. In the future you could imagine, and that's already like things that are being discussed, right? We split off block production and that's one specific duty. Then we have the normal attestations, that would be the more traditional type of staking. And then we are about to ship this fossil inclusion list mechanism, right? Where basically participating in the censorship resistance of the network would be now a new role that by default would just be filled by the same stakers, but you could imagine having a different kind of subset of stakers participate in that. And then you could have different ways of incentivizing the different kind of subset of staking and say, okay, well, maybe it's more like, say, for censorship resistance, we really optimize that anyone, even if you just run it on your phone, right, and you're only online 10% of the time, you can still contribute because there it's like a very low, like you can't really misbehave. Worst case, you just submit rubbish and you don't actually help the censorship resistance, right? But like that kind of thing, whereas attestations, if you misbehave, it actually hurts the network. So maybe, like we have more stringent rules there. So that type of like specialization within the staking set, that one I'm optimistic about. I think that one we might go towards. The other side that sometimes people propose is like, what if we just pay solo stakers more? And that sounds great. It sounds great. Or like, for example, what if we just explicitly pay geodiversity more, right? Like if you are staking from a continent that like, and then there are sometimes people even try to go into the technical details of like, we just measure your ping. And if you're like, you're like in a place where you can like, and we try to map down where on earth you are and like whatnot. So basically, fundamentally, these approaches are always unsustainable. When you incentivize solo staking, everyone will look like a solo staker, and secretly, collaborate. So that's just like long-term, not a thing. We can always just enshrine the first 10,000 people that came into the beacon chain, they will just always get the yield and everyone else just goes to zero, but like that's also not super sustainable. They'll sell their seats. And then with geo, like incentivization and whatnot, literally the only way to even remotely make that possible is by like 10xing the complexity of the entire network, right? Which is just absolutely out of scope. So I think while that is like, I would love if we had the magic wand, that would be the first feature, but that type of different treatment is, I think, completely impossible.
Okay, probably one last question, someone who hasn't had their question answered yet. Wow. Oh, okay, sorry, who was you? Okay, let's do 2, but quick. So you, blue shirt first, and then we'll do you after.
Yeah. So I myself a solo staker. I just want to take a step back, right? So to understand, if we reduce issuance, wouldn't this drive me to the lower cost alternative, like liquid staking or centralized staking? And then if we just extrapolate this further, wouldn't the centralized options be left remaining? I know you mentioned if there's not enough liquidity there, then someone like Coinbase would not bother to do it, but there will be smaller centralized players in that field. And also, if my fear is that this would drive everyone to pursue yield from other sources, for example, restaking. And if everyone pursues restaking, we go from like a validated set of, say, like maybe 5,000, 8,000 operators to 100 operators. And that, I think, is a worse outcome.
Yeah, and I agree. This is exactly why people are concerned with all of these potential solutions. The problem is if lower yield drives you to do that, if we do nothing, your yield also goes lower. And like it goes lower, like of course at a slow, continuous rate instead of like a one-time cut. But the endpoint will not be higher than if we do the one-time cut. Like this is the fundamental problem. That's why I was saying it's easier to all agree there is a problem than to agree on a solution. Like I think we unfortunately go to that world where you will be very tempted to do it either way. And so that is why it's fundamentally hard to solve this problem. Like the pressures, the yield pressures will become very, very, very harsh even if we do nothing for the next 2 years to figure this out. Okay, even if we double issue.
This is more of a comment actually, but about the segmentation. So one way of segmenting is the anti-correlation kind of penalties. I think that's probably a key aspect of this whole thing, is to make sure that they are very high, so that if the ETF stake does come in, then they will be punished severely if they do not decentralize their stake.
And they pay more for their slashing insurance.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Seems like a no-brainer to raise those. Any?
No, agree on that. And I just want to do a quick poll. Anyone has changed their minds on anything after this?
Raise your hand. Okay. We have, yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, and yeah, we're at time. Yeah. Thank you to all the panelists, to all of you for participating.